Let's now learn about choices, specifically how to display choices on screen for the player to choose from. That's a standard feature in dialog systems, and of course Candy Dialog Engine is going to have it. First, here in the command panel, go to the choices category and click the choice list button to add a choice list command to your dialog. Now, here on the left, you have this section with 3 buttons on top: plus category, plus choice, and plus timer. This is for adding categories, choices, and timers to your choice list command. First, you need to add a category. Every choice list needs at least one. Give it any name you want. For example, I'm going to name mine activity, because we're going to ask the player what kind of activity they want to do. You'll notice that we have some data fields here on the right. We're going to talk about them later, but for now notice that there's a menu settings section for settings or data that pertain to the entire command, and there's a category settings for data that pertains to the selected category. Now, we need to add choices, obviously. So make sure you select a category and add some choices to it. And I'm going to add shopping, studying, and sports. There we go. And notice a new section here has appeared, choice settings, and it contains data for the selected choice. Now, before we configure anything further, let me just show you what our choice menu looks like in a game. And there we go. Now, don't worry about the way it looks. The choice UI that's provided by default is extremely basic, but like all UIs in Candy Dialog Engine, it can be fully customized. And here you can see we have our choice buttons, and if I click on them, nothing happens because we haven't configured any effects for any of these choices. But yeah, you can see that at least we have a menu with choice buttons being displayed. Now let's look at the settings. Right now we're going to ignore the menu and category settings because they're not very important. Let's focus instead on the choice settings. And the first data field we have here is the choice label. So, for example, you can write a more detailed description of each choice. Like this: study for your next classes, play sports. And now let me just show you once again what it looks like in the game. You can see now that the buttons, they display the text we just wrote. Go to the mall, study for your next classes, play sports. And previously, they displayed the name of the choice: shopping, studying, sports. So, you can give your choices any name you want, and on screen, if you want them to have a slightly more descriptive label, well, you can just write whatever you want in this field here. Now, we're going to ignore these data fields here for now. We'll get back to them later. And we're going to look at the choice selected data fields here at the bottom. Now, here's how it works. For a choice to have any kind of effect, you need to make it transition to another part of your dialog. It can be another block, or it could be just a different line in the same block that the choice list is in. That doesn't matter. The point is, you need to transition somewhere. And wherever a choice transitions, there are going to be more dialog lines. It could be command lines or even spoken lines, and basically the dialog engine is just going to run these lines. And therefore, these lines will be acting as the choice's effect. Now, keep in mind, Candy Dialog Engine has control commands which allow you to modify variables or call functions. So choices can have any kind of effect you want on your game. They're not limited to dialogue. They can modify the state of your game or pretty much anything dialogue commands can do. But that's how it basically works. A choice transitions to another part of your dialogue, and this causes commands to run, and that's how a choice has an effect. Now, let me show you how to set this up. Here I have block 2, and it has 3 sections, and each section will match one of the choices. Here we have a first section for shopping, so it starts with a line mark named shopping, and inside this section Alice says, "Great, let's go to the mall." Then we have a section that starts with a line mark study, and Alice says, "Good idea, we need to prepare for the next test." And finally we have a third section which starts with the line mark named sports, and Alice says, "I've always been good at tennis." So basically the player is going to make a choice, and depending on the choice Alice is going to comment on it, and after that the choice menu is going to close on screen, and Alice is going to say this: "Let's go then." So here, for the shopping choice, I'm going to select block 2, and I don't need to select the conversation because it's the same conversation. And I'm going to select the shopping line mark. For studying, I'm going to select block 2 and the study line mark, and for sports, I will select block 2 and the sports line mark. Now, there's just one more thing I need to do, and that's selecting a transition. Now here we have the usual transitions: bridge, jump, return, and end, but we have 2 new transitions: continue and close. So we need to understand what all these transitions do here in the context of choices. The bridge transition is going to bridge to the block specified here, and then when it runs out of lines in that block, it's going to return here after the choice list command. So the choice list command is going to close. The jump transition is going to jump to the block specified here. So the choice list is going to close as well, and the dialog is never going to return here. It's going to remain in the block that it transitions to, which is standard for jumps. Remember how the jump command works. It's a permanent transition. The return transition, it's going to close the menu, and if the dialog came here in this block from a bridge, it's going to immediately return from that bridge. Now here it wouldn't work because the dialog didn't come here to the choice list from a bridge. It starts in this block. And, well, it would just close the choice list and it would end the dialog. That's it. Now, close. This would not do a transition, even if you provide values here like a block and a line to transition to. Close would just close the choice list, and it would continue to the next line here. No transition. And finally, continue is a more special case. Continue would run a bridge transition to the block specified here, and then it would return from that block once the block has no lines left. And the difference with the bridge transition is that continue is going to keep the choice list open on screen instead of continuing to the next line. So that means if you select continue, after bridging to block 2, the player can make another choice in this list. Now, in the case of our current example, what we want is the bridge transition. We want to bridge to block 2 and one of the line marks, and then we want to return and continue to this line as I mentioned earlier. So here, bridge would be correct. Make sure you select the correct transition for what you're trying to achieve. So I'm just going to set all 3 choices to bridge. There we go. Okay. And, well, now we can test it. Here we go. Okay, so we've got our choices again, and now let's just pick one. It doesn't matter which one. They're all configured the same way, so let's try play sports as an example. I've always been good at tennis. That's exactly what Alice is supposed to say when we choose sports. And if I continue, let's go then. Notice that after, well, let me show you. I selected sports, so it transitioned here to LM Sports, line mark sports. Alice said, I've always been good at tennis. And then we returned to block 1. And since we selected bridge, not continue, the choice list was closed and dialog continued to the next line after the choice list. Perfect. So that's an example of a simple choice list. As you can see, it's really not complicated. One category, as many choices as you want. Just, make sure you configure them by giving them a transition. And wherever those choices transition, make sure you add the correct lines according to what you're trying to do. And something you can do here, this is just an example. This is just to help you a little bit. For example, here, I could add a set command, and let's imagine I have this variable next destination, and I could give it the value sports field. And let me just copy the command, and I'm going to add it to every choice. Library, and here shopping mall. Now, why am I doing this? Again, this is just for the sake of example. It's not going to actually do anything because I don't actually have a game. But imagine you have your dialogue, and the dialogue right now, it's just, whatever you choose, it's making Alice speak. But it doesn't change anything. The dialogue doesn't actually move the player to another location. So if you want your game to actually do this, you can use the set command to store the choice that the player made. So if the player chooses to play sports, this variable, next destination, it stores a sports field. And then, when dialogue ends, you can program your game to make the player go to the sports field. So this way, the dialogue choice actually has an effect in your game. Now, to make the player go to the sports field, you have to write that code because this is outside the scope of Candy Dialogue Engine. This is part of your game. It's not part of the dialogue anymore. But this is just to show you an example of how to make choices have an impact not just on the dialogue, but also on your game. And it's not the only option, but this is one example for now. Now, something convenient is that choice lists can have multiple categories. And let me show you. First, I'm going to delete all the transitions for every choice, and I will set it to continue, like this. There we go. So now our choices don't do anything anymore. They don't have an effect. And I'm going to add some categories. For example, one category will be shopping, another will be studying, and finally the last one will be sports. Okay, and now let's add some choices inside each category. So we'll add a mall choice for shopping, and plaza, and central market. Now for studying, we're going to add some studying topics: physics, history, and literature. And for sports, we can add tennis, because Alice likes this, clearly, basketball, and how about running? Okay, so now we have 4 categories. We have activity, shopping, studying, and sports. Alright, now, the first thing we need to do, in the menu settings, right here, we need to select a main category. And this is the category that will be displayed by default when the menu opens. So we want to select activity. That's the main category we want. And next, we need to configure these choices to navigate to these categories. And we do this here in the navigation data field. And we can provide a category to navigate to from the list. So the shopping choice is going to display the shopping category. And studying will display the studying category. And sports will, of course, display the sports category. Great. But now there's one more thing we want to do. We want to add a 4th choice to every category, which is back. Like this. Okay, and now we are going to configure all these back choices to return to the activity category. There we go. And now let's test this inside our game. So let's see. Okay, now we have our activity category being displayed first because we selected the activity category as the main category. And now let's see what happens if I click Go Shopping. It displays the shopping category. And you can see I have all my shopping choices: mall, plaza, central market, and back. And if I click back, I return to the activity category. And it works for all 3 categories here. Perfect. So this is how you can use multiple categories. Each category has its own choices, and only one category can be displayed on screen at a time. So this is convenient when you want to group choices and let the player navigate through each category of choices. But now, something you need to know is that choices can actually navigate to another category and also have an effect at the same time. I'm going to show you a small example here. Here is my shopping choice, and it navigates to the shopping category. but I'm also going to make it bridge to a block. And you'll see what we're going to do with this. So I just need to set this up quickly. There we go. And I'm going to select continue as the transition. I'm not going to select bridge, because here, when one of these choices is selected, I don't want to close the choice list. I want to stay inside of it. I just want Alice to make a comment on the category we click, and then display the category so I can make more choices. So let me now just modify Alice's dialogues. There we go, give them okay, and now let me just test the dialogue to show you. And let's see. Okay, so we have our activity category again, same as before, that's normal. Now let's see what happens when we click Go Shopping. And now two things happen. First, notice that the menu is blacked out. And that's because the default menu includes a shield. And a shield is basically a color rect node which covers the menu. It basically shows that the menu is deactivated at the moment, and it prevents clicking with the mouse on anything. So it's a safety feature. And notice also that Alice is making a comment about the choice we just made. I love shopping, where should we go? So I just want to be very clear on what's happening here, okay? So here we made this choice, shopping, and it did two things. First, it navigated to the shopping category, and that's why we're seeing the shopping category under the shield. Also, it bridged to block 2 and to the shopping line mark. And this causes Alice to make this comment. Now, at the moment, we are here. The dialogue is here in this bridge and at this line. So, right now, the dialogue is waiting for us to press the dialogue advance key. And the choice menu will remain deactivated until the dialogue advances and reaches the return command. When it reaches the return command, we will return here to the choice list. And the reason we are returning to the choice list is because the shopping choice is configured to do a continue transition. And as I mentioned before, it's a bridge transition, but it doesn't move on. It doesn't close the choice list. It continues inside the choice list. So now I'm going to press the dialogue advance key. And look what happens. The shield disappeared, and I could select another choice now. However, Alice's text did not disappear. It's still present on screen, and it might be a bit distracting or confusing, because it might feel like we did not return to the choice list completely. But don't worry, it's completely normal for the text to be there, and there's a solution to remove it. If I go back to Candy Dialog Creator and to block 2, well, there's a special command I can use to make Alice's line disappear after we press Dialog Advance. And that command is found in the effects categories right here. And that's the clear command. Now, what's the clear command? Well, it's a command that hides dialog UI elements. And you can see here there's data fields for different types of dialog UI elements. And right now the one we care about is this one, clear dialog box. Now all the data fields are set to 1 by default. That means by default they will all be cleared. So it's going to clear the dialog box, the subtitles if we have subtitles displayed, speech bubbles, portraits, visual novel busts if you're using visual novel mode and visual novel commands, and backgrounds. So you need to be mindful of this. The clear command by default is very convenient. We don't have to configure anything at all because it's pre-configured to clear everything. But let's imagine in your dialog you're displaying backgrounds and you only want to clear the dialog box and you want to keep the backgrounds. Well, you need to remember to disable the background clear. Okay, now this isn't complicated, it's just a little bit of setup you need to remember to do. Okay, so let me add a clear command after each of Alice's lines, like this. That's it. Okay, so now let's test again. Here we go. Okay, so we're back in our choice menu. I'm going to select Go Shopping again. Alice is going to speak. Notice that the menu is shielded for now. And now I'm going to press Dialog Advance. And now the menu is unshielded because we returned to the menu. And notice that the clear command worked and it removed the dialog box with Alice's line and portrait. Okay, very good. And now I'm going to click back and we return to the first category, the activity category. Now let me just pick another choice just to make sure everything is clear. So let's go with Play Sports. And once again the menu gets shielded and Alice makes a comment, and if I press Dialog Advance, we return to the menu, Alice's line disappears. There we go. Excellent. And you can see how simple it is to set that up, right? It might look like a lot of lines, but when you understand what they do, it's actually very simple. You just need a line mark reference for each choice, and then place some commands like a spoken line, add a clear command if you want to hide the dialog box when we're finished reading, and then a return command so we go back to the choice list. And again, when you configure choices, remember navigation. That's one thing if you want to navigate to a different category. And also remember the selected transition. And here, again, you've got your regular transitions. You also have continue and close. I explained these earlier, and I just showed you how continue works. And here you just provide a conversation block and a line for the transition if you want the choice to make a transition. Again, if you just want the choice to navigate, just leave those fields empty like this. Okay, I hope that's clear. It's really not that complicated. It might require a little bit of getting used to, but honestly, once you understand it, it's very simple. Now, let's learn about timers. You can add timers to a choice list, and these timers will count down a custom amount of time, and once they reach 0, they will select a choice. To add a timer, just click the plus timer button and give your timer a name. I'm going to name mine T1 for timer 1. When you select a timer, you can see here this new section called Timer Settings. And here you have several data fields. The first one, Countdown Time, represents the time in seconds that the timer counts down. You can provide any value, including decimal numbers. I'm going to set mine to 5 seconds. Then you have countdown loops. And this is how many times the timer will count down. It's set to 1 by default, so the timer will count down, and then it will do whatever it does when it reaches 0, and that's it. But as an example, if you set it to 3, the timer is going to count down 3 times, and each time it will select a choice. If you want the timer to repeat infinitely, set the value to -1. Again, I'm going to set it to 1. Here you have automatic start, and this is just asking you if the timer should start automatically when the choice menu appears on screen, or if you want to start the timer later. Now, I'm not going to go into details about this right now. I will explain it later. But for example, you can design a choice to start a timer when that choice is selected. Or you could perhaps use code in your game to start a timer when something specific happens. If you want the timer to start immediately, select Start, and if you don't want the timer to start, select Hold. I'm going to set it to Start because I want the timer to start immediately when the choice list appears. And finally, you need to select which choice the timer is going to trigger. If you click the button here, you can see all the categories in my list, and I can select any choice inside these categories. And I'm going to select studying inside the activity category. Now notice what's being written here. This is the correct format for indicating the choice that the timer should select. First, you need to write the category, and then add a comma, and write the choice. Okay, let's test it. Now, let's wait 5 seconds. And here we go. The timer counted down 5 seconds, and once it did, it selected the studying choice automatically. So now, the stuff that happens when the studying choice is selected is happening right now. You can see that the menu here has the shield on, but you can still see through the shield that it's now displaying the study category. And you can see Alice's speech when we select the study choice. Good idea, we need to prepare for the next test. So yeah, the timer just selected the study choice instead of the player selecting that choice manually. But you probably noticed it felt a little bit weird that a choice was suddenly selected without warning. The player might think there was a bug or some kind of issue. So we should probably add something to give the player a bit more context, to tell the player that a choice was made automatically. And this is where we have this option here. We have this grayed out button called timeout. So let me click on it, and now it's going to show the timeout fields. The timeout is a bridge transition. It's like choices. Remember choices, they have an effect by doing a transition. And here, it's the same for timers. You can configure a bridge transition. So I'm going to create a transition to block 3. And I'm going to add some lines in block 3. So here we go. In block 3, Alice is going to say, well, if you're not going to make up your mind, I'll choose for us. So let's go back to our choice list, and just to explain what's going to happen. The timer is going to count down 5 seconds, and then it's going to bridge to block 3. And Alice is going to say that since we're not making a choice, she's choosing for us. And after that, the timer will select a choice. And I'm going to change the choice to shopping because it's going to fit better. Okay, so let's go and test it. Let's wait 5 seconds. And here we go. Alice is saying, well, if you're not going to make up your mind, I'll choose for us. And now I'm going to press the dialog advance key, and the timer is going to select the shopping choice. So let's watch. Here we go. The category changed to shopping, and Alice is now saying, I love shopping, where should we go? Pretty neat. And notice, if I go back to the main category, and if I manually select Go Shopping, Alice only says, I love shopping, where should we go? She doesn't say that she's going to choose for us because it wouldn't make sense since we chose manually. So that's just another thing you can do with timers. Now, just to clarify, you don't have to use the timeout transition for the purpose I showed you. A timer can have a timeout transition and no choice. That works. It can have both a timeout and a choice. And as I showed you earlier in the beginning, it can have a choice and no timeout transition. And again, you can use the timeout transition for anything you want. It doesn't have to be just for displaying text on screen. Okay, the important thing to remember is a timer is going to first run the timeout transition, and that's always a bridge. And once it has run the timeout transition, it selects a choice. It's always in that order, so just keep that in mind. Now, let's look at some more options for the choice list. First, here in the menu settings, you have the reference field. And the reference field is basically a title or a description you can assign to a choice list command. If you look at the line list here on the left, notice that here it just says choice list and there's no information provided, no data, nothing. And that's because the choice list has so much data, it wouldn't be practical to write the data here. So instead, you can just give it whatever title you want, whatever reference you want, and it's going to be written here so you can quickly remember what each choice list command does. Next, you have the title field, and notice menu settings and category settings both have a title field. And this is just a title you can display either for the entire menu or for specific categories inside the UI in your game. Now, the default choice list UI that's provided with Candy Dialog Engine does not display a title. And there is a little bit of code. There's a small function that's provided for displaying a title, but you do need to do some custom modifications. It's not very difficult, and I will show you how to do it later. You also have the option of displaying a prompt inside your choice list UI. And again, you can have a prompt for the entire menu or a prompt for each category. And again, the default UI does not display a prompt, but the code is basically there already. You just need to do some minor modifications to enable the prompt display. And I will show you later how to do that as well. And then we have mouse mode. And this one is interesting. Now, let's talk about mouse mode for the choice menu. If you go back to your dialog UI, such as the Candy UI, and you look at the inspector where you have the settings, under mouse mode, you have three settings. You have the mouse mode start and mouse mode end, which I talked about earlier in this video. And these two settings change the mouse mode automatically when dialog starts or ends. And you also have mouse mode choice, and this changes the mouse mode when a choice list command runs. So for example, imagine that I set mouse mode start to hidden. When dialog runs, the mouse will be hidden. And then here, if I set mouse mode choice to visible, when a choice list command runs, the mouse will become visible. Let me show you. So here dialog started, and you can see there's no mouse pointer on screen because the dialog start variable set the mouse mode to hidden. Now I'm going to advance and the choice list will appear and the mouse pointer will become visible. And here it is, right here, you can see it. Okay. Now there's some more options to configure mouse mode inside the choice list command. Here in the menu settings, you can enable mouse mode and it will display the mouse mode field. And the value is set to default by default. Now, the value default means that the menu should use the engine settings. So in other words, if I set this to default, it's basically telling the dialog engine that it needs to use this setting here, mouse mode choice, which is set to visible. But I can override that. So just to demonstrate, let me change this to hidden. Okay, so now the mouse will be hidden when dialog starts, and it will remain hidden when the choice list appears on screen. And here in the menu settings, I'm going to change it to default. And you will see that when the choice list appears on screen, the mouse will appear because this overrides the engine settings. So let's test it. Okay, so mouse is hidden, and now the mouse is visible because the menu settings overrode the engine settings. Great. There's another special option you can select for mouse mode, and this option is none. If I select none, the data is removed. Now, what does this do? Well, this means do not change the mouse mode. Okay, if I select default, it's going to use whatever is here, mouse mode choice. And if I select none, it's not going to use that. So let me show you with an example. I'm going to set mouse mode choice to visible. So normally, this is what would happen. When dialog starts, the mouse would be hidden, and then when the choice list appears, the mouse would become visible. However, since I selected none instead of default, the mouse will not change and it will remain hidden. So let's test it. Okay, the mouse is hidden at the dialog start. You can see that there's no mouse on screen. And now if I advance, the mouse remains hidden. So yeah, it worked. It didn't use the default setting. It didn't use the default setting. It didn't make the mouse visible. Okay, so that's what none does. And you can also provide a mouse mode value for categories. Each category can have its own mouse mode. So by default, categories have mouse mode set to menu. And menu means use this mouse mode here. Use the mouse mode of the menu settings. Okay, so for example, if I set the menu to visible, this is saying that the category should use visible as well. However, I can give categories a different value. For example, I could use hidden and the menu could have visible. And what would happen is that each category would override the menu settings. So let me show you here. Activity is the main category. It's the first category that gets displayed when the menu opens on screen. And activity is configured to menu. And menu is configured to visible. So when the menu opens, the mouse becomes visible. And the shopping category is configured to hidden. So if I select the shopping choice and the menu switches to the shopping category, the mouse will become hidden. Let's test it. So the mouse is hidden at the start, and now it becomes visible when the choice list appears. And if I select shopping, the mouse becomes hidden because the shopping category overrides the menu settings. So the important thing to note here is that when you change to a different category, when you navigate to a different category, the category's mouse mode is activated. Okay, so that's something that you need to remember. You can change the mouse mode when you change to another category. Now, something to note is that choices don't have a mouse mode. Okay, if you were thinking that you want a choice to change the mouse mode when the choice is selected, there's no built-in mouse mode for choices. But you can still make choices change the mouse mode. And to do this, you would use the mouse command. And I will talk about the mouse command later, but this is a command that changes the mouse mode. So remember, choices transition to another block when they're selected. So, like here I have block 2. So if I added a mouse command, I could make the choice change the mouse mode. So this is how you would do it. Now let's learn about some more choice options. Here I have a new choice list which represents a merchant's store and the items that the merchant sells. So let's start here with the sword choice. This choice will represent the player having the option of buying a sword. Now the first option I want to talk about is the tooltip. You can write a tooltip for any choice, and this tooltip will be displayed when you hover the choice with the mouse. For example, I can write this, a regular sword. And now let's just test it quickly in our game. There we go, we have our choices, and you can see if I hover sword, a tooltip appears, a regular sword. Now, just to give you some more ideas, you can replace the tooltip text with a variable reference. And this can be useful if you want your tooltips to adjust dynamically at runtime. For example, let me show you this tooltip here, sword description. So this is what it says here, sword description, a regular sword, cost, and then 300 divided by reputation, gold. So this is the dynamic part of the tooltip. It's going to calculate the price of the sword based on the player's reputation. So let's just have a look at it in our game to see how it works. So a regular sword cost 150 gold, because the original price is 300 divided by reputation, which is 2. Let me just show you again. Here you go. 300 divided by reputation, and reputation is 2. That's 150. Okay, so that's just an interesting thing you can do with tooltips if you ever need it. But now, a much more important thing I want to show you about choices, it's this here, those 3 fields: choice enabled, choice active, and choice invisible. Now, these are very important. Choice enabled decides if a choice is going to be added to the list on screen at all. So when a choice is enabled, a button is created. But if a choice is disabled, then no button is created for the choice. Okay, so I'll show you later. Then let me choose shield. And now we have here choice active. And choice active decides if anything happens when the button is clicked. So if I disable active, the button will be appearing on screen, but if I click on it, nothing will happen. And I'm going to do that for shield. And then I have sword plus, and here you have choice invisible. Now choice invisible means that a button is created, but is the button displayed or not? By default, choice invisible is set to 0. That means the choice is not invisible. The button is visible. And if I want to hide the button, I can set this to true. And I'm going to do that for sword and shield. Now, let me just test to show you in-game what it looks like. Here we go. You can see I have only 2 buttons. I have shield and I have more. And I'm going to use this one in a moment. Notice that the button named sword is not here because it was disabled. No button was created. And sword plus and shield plus are missing. Now buttons have been created for sword plus and shield plus, but the buttons have been hidden. So the buttons exist. They just don't show on screen and the player cannot interact with them. And shield has been disabled. Now, let me just add an effect to shield. There we go. And I'm going to give Alice a line. You bought a shield. There we go. Okay. And I'm just going to show you quickly. So shield is inactive. So if I click on it, nothing happens. If it were active, and let me show you that, let's go back here, shield. Now I'm going to set it to active, and you will see that Alice is going to speak. There you go. Now it's active, so when I click, she speaks. Now, why would you make choices invisible instead of simply disabling them, right? Enabled or invisible, it seems to be the same thing. There's no choice on screen. Well, that's because when you disable a choice, timers cannot select it. The choice does not exist, basically. However, when a choice is invisible, the player can't select it, but timers can select it. So let me show you. Here I have the sword choice, and it's disabled. And here I have the sword plus choice, and it's enabled, but it's also invisible. And I have 2 timers. I have sword, which has a countdown of 3 seconds, and sword is going to select the sword choice. And then I have sword plus, and I'm going to give it an 8-second countdown, and it's going to select the sort plus choice. And here's what's going to happen. The sort timer, it won't select sort because sort is disabled. However, sort plus is going to select the sort plus choice because sort plus is simply invisible. Okay? And notice that, Alice is going to tell us when we buy a sword or a sort plus. So, let's go and check. Now, let's just wait 3 seconds, and you're going to see we're not buying a sword. But if we wait 8 seconds, we're going to buy a sword plus automatically. Look at this. You bought a sword plus. We never saw the message you bought a sword. And remember, the sword timer, the regular sword, is 3 seconds, and sort plus is 8. So if we saw the sort plus message and we didn't see the sword message, well, that means the timer expired, but the sort choice was not selected. And again, well, that's because the sword choice is disabled. It cannot be selected by timers. However, sort plus is enabled, and it's just invisible. So the player does not see the choice on screen, but the timer can select the choice. Okay, and now we're going to learn about a new command, which is the choice status command. And the choice status command allows us to modify a few things about choices. Mainly, it allows us to modify if a choice is enabled, active, or invisible. And we're going to do this for the more choice. This is where the more choice becomes relevant. So the more choice, it bridges to block 2. So in block 2, we're going to add the choice status command. Now, there's quite a bit of data fields here. It might seem like a lot at first, but you're going to see that it makes sense once you understand what everything does. First, here at the top, you have those 6 data fields called targeting or target tags. Okay. Now, these data fields are important because they tell the command which choices are going to be modified. Or in other words, which choices should the command target. Now, first you need to select some targeting logic for the menu. By default, menu targeting mode is set to last, and this means it's going to only modify choices in the last choice list command or the last choice menu that was created. Remember, when you have a choice list and you have choices, you could configure these choices to open a new choice list. And that gives you nested choice lists. You still have the first choice list opened, but you have a second choice list also opened. And the first choice list is hidden, but it's still there. It's not erased. It's not deleted. So if you select last as the targeting mode, it's going to target the last choice list or choice menu that was created. Next, another option is all. And this means it's going to target choices inside all of the opened choice menus. And then you have tags. And this one is interesting. It allows very precise targeting. Let's go back to our choice list command and let's look at the menu settings. And here you have this button, tags. So click on it to enable it. And now you have this field here, menu tags. And in here, you can add some tags like this: weapons, equipment, non-magical. Okay, you can write any tag you want. And if we go back to our choice status command, I can tell the command target all the menus that have the weapons tag. So if I have multiple menus open, any menu that has this tag will be targeted, and menus that don't have this tag will not be targeted for modification. All right. And then you have the category targeting mode. Now, here's the thing. You also have a last option, but it's slightly different than the menu targeting mode. The menu targeting mode targets the last created menu, but for categories, it targets the last selected category, or more specifically, the category of the last selected choice. So for last to work, the player must have selected a choice. And whatever category that choice belongs to, it will be targeted by the choice status command. If the player has not selected a choice, this is not going to work. There's no selected choice, so there's no last choice or last category. Then you have all, and again, that means target all categories. Now, what if you have multiple menus? Well, this will target all categories only inside the targeted menus. Here we only target menus with the weapons tag, so this here will target all categories inside menus that have the weapons tag. If a menu doesn't have this tag, it won't be targeted at all. And of course you have the tags option, just like with menus. And again, if you go back to the choice list and you select a category, here you have the tags button, and you can also provide tags to a category. So I could add this tag here, sale, and then inside my category targeting, I select tag, sale, and there we go. Any category with this tag is going to be targeted, and categories that don't have this tag will not be modified by the choice status command. Right, and then you have the same options for choices. So, as an example here, you have last, and this is the last selected choice. So if you select last, only the last selected choice is going to be modified. If you select all the choices will be modified, but only choices inside the targeted categories and inside the targeted menus. If a menu or a category is not targeted, choices inside of those will not be modified. And you have tags as well for choices. So here I can go back to block 1, select a choice, and I can enable the tags field. So here for sword, I would add the sword tag, and for sword plus, I would also add the sword tag. And for sword plus, I would add the plus tag. And for shield plus, I'm adding shield and plus. It has 2 tags. And for regular shield, I just add shield. Alright, I hope this is clear. It should be fairly straightforward. And so here, I'm going to do this. Okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, okay, sorry, last here. So, here's how I'm setting up my choice status command. I'm going to target the last created menu, so I don't need to specify tags. And I'm going to target all categories inside the menu, because it's possible no choice will have been made when this runs. So the safest option for me here is to simply target all categories. There's only one anyway, so that works. And now here, for choice targeting, I'm targeting the choices with the plus tag. And if you pay attention, these choices with the plus tag, sort plus and shield plus, are invisible. And what we're going to do here, we're going to make these choices visible. So let's look at these options here. Enable, disable, activate, deactivate, show, hide. These modify whether a choice is enabled, activated, or visible. And by default, they have this dash here. And this means, if you write a dash, it means do not modify whether a choice is enabled or not. Leave that the way it is. Don't touch it. That's what it means. Okay? If a choice is enabled, keep it enabled. If it's disabled, keep it disabled. That's what the dash means. And another option is enable. So, if a choice is disabled, it would become enabled. And if it's already enabled, nothing would change. And I could disable a choice, or I could toggle. Now, toggle, it means if a choice is enabled, it becomes disabled. But if a choice is disabled, then it becomes enabled. So toggle means do the opposite. Okay, so I don't want to modify if choices are enabled, I just want to make them visible. So I'm going to keep the dash here. Then I have activate, deactivate, and I have the same options. The dash means don't change anything to the choices. I can activate choices if they're deactivated. I can deactivate choices if they're activated. And I can toggle. I can do the opposite of whatever the choices are. And finally here, show, hide, we have the same options again. And here, what I want to do is show the choices. I want to show shield plus and sort plus. I want to make them visible. So that's what I'm going to do here. All right. And finally, I won't show you how it works because this should be very easy to understand. I can modify the label of a choice and the tooltip of a choice. That's another thing that the choice status command can change. As a reminder, I showed you the tooltip moments ago, but as a reminder, the label, it's the text written inside the button. So yeah, okay. The command, when you understand it, it should be fairly simple. So now let's test the choice status command. I'm gonna export my dialog to a test and run it. Okay, so I have shield and I have more. And now when I click more, the choice status command should run and it should make sort plus and shield plus visible. So let's see. There we go. Sort plus, shield plus are now visible. And if we go back to our choice status, just to recap, we targeted the last created choice list, the last menu. That's our choice list command here. We targeted all the categories in this menu. And we targeted specifically, in those categories, we targeted the choices that have the plus tag. And these choices are sort plus and shield plus. And what did we change? We simply changed if they were shown or hidden. That's all. We didn't change if they're enabled. We didn't change if they're activated. We only changed show, or hide. And we also did not change the label or the tooltip of these choices. We could have. We didn't. Okay, I hope this is clear. Again, it seems like a lot at first. It can look a bit confusing, but it's actually very simple, very logical. So you shouldn't have any problems getting familiar with the choice status command and using it. And now let's learn about the timer status command. Now, the timer status command is similar to the choice status command. The only difference is that it allows you to modify timers inside a choice menu instead of choices. Now, here at the top, you have some targeting options, which should be familiar now that you've seen the choice status command. First, you need to target a menu, and you have the same options as with the choice status command. And these options are to target the last created menu, or to target all opened menus, or to target menus based on their tags. I'm just going to go with last created. It doesn't matter. I have only one. And then you need to determine how you want to target timers themselves. Now, you can target the last timer that timed out, if there is one. If no timer has timed out and you select last, the command will not do anything. Or you could just target all the timers inside the targeted menus. Or you could target timers by tags. That works as well. And if we go back to our choice list command and we select a timer, we have a timer tags data field where we can write tags. And here I'm going to write the following tag. I'm going to write shield, and I will make my timer select the shield choice. Now, I'll just go back here to the timer status command, and I will write the shield tag for targeting. So this should target my timer that selects the shield option. Next, I can edit the time. Now, my timer here is set to 5 seconds. But if I wanted to, I could set it to something else. For example, I could set it to 10. And then I'm not going to edit the time or the number of loops right now. I'll show you this later. What I'm going to do is edit the timer status. Now, you may remember that earlier, when I explained how timers worked, I mentioned this field here, automatic start. And if you select start, the timer starts counting down as soon as the menu is displayed on screen. And you can select hold, which means the timer will not start counting down, and you need to activate the countdown somehow. I mentioned you could activate the countdown through your own game code, or you can do it here in the edit timer status data field. Now here, if you select the dash, it will not modify whether the timer is counting down or not. It will just leave it alone. If you select start or resume, it's going to start the timer if it hasn't been started yet, or it will resume it if it was paused. You can also select pause. If the timer was counting down, this is going to pause it, and then later you can resume with this option. Or if the timer is counting down, you can also select stop, and this will stop the timer entirely. And later, if you start the timer again, it will restart from the beginning. That's the difference between pause and stop. Let's say your timer is set to count down 10 seconds, and at 5 seconds you pause it. When you resume, it will continue counting down from 5 seconds. On the other hand, if you stop at 5 seconds, and you later restart the timer, it will restart from 10, not 5. Now, my timer starts on hold, which means it's not counting down. So I'm going to set it to start resume. Okay. And now let me go back here, and I have this choice here called set timer. And this is a choice. When I click it, it's gonna bridge to block 6, and it's going to run the timer status. So when I click the set timer choice, what's gonna happen here, it's going to start the timer. The timer will not start until I click this. Okay, let's go. Now, here we are in our choice menu, and you can see I have the set timer button. I did not click it yet, and my timer was set to 5 seconds by default, and I think it has been approximately 5 seconds now. So if the timer was running, the shield choice would have been selected. Obviously it hasn't, and it's been more than 5 seconds. So now let me click the set timer button, and it should start the timer. So let's go. I'm gonna click 2, 3, 4, 5. And here we are. You bought a shield. You can see the timer started when I clicked and then counted 5 seconds and then selected the shield choice. It worked. You can also use the timer status command to modify the countdown time and the number of loops of a timer. And I'm going to show you how to do this. So here I've renamed my choice set timer to start timer. So this starts the timer. And I changed the timer countdown to 10 seconds. And here I have this new choice, time 1. And time 1 is going to run this timer status command here. And this timer status is going to modify the time of the timer. And it will modify the time to 1 second only instead of 10. So this way you will immediately see that it worked. And if I wanted to, I could change the number of loops here. The timer's number of loops is 1. I could set this to 5 or 3 if I wanted to. And now here we have the update timer data field. And this one is important when you update a timer's time. And you have 3 options. The update timer data field is basically asking what should happen if the countdown has already started and the time is updated by this command. Let's take the following example. Our current timer starts the countdown at 10 seconds. So it's going to count 10, 9, 8, 7, and so on. But let's imagine that when it reaches 7, this command runs, and it changes the countdown time to 3. Now, this is the time that countdowns start at. Our current countdown, which has already started, is currently at 7 seconds. So, what happens to this current countdown? And this is what update timer decides. If you set it to ignore, nothing happens. The countdown will continue from 7, 6, 5, 4, and so on. If you select restart, the current countdown is going to restart, and it will restart using the new value. So if the new value is 3, it restarts the countdown at 3 seconds. If the new value is 15, it restarts the countdown at 15 seconds. And update, it doesn't restart the timer, it just updates the current countdown. So if the current countdown is at 7 and we change the countdown time to 3, well, 7 is no longer possible logically. Countdown should start at 3, so how could it be 7? So update is going to change 7 to 3 because 3 is smaller than 7. However, if the value is 15 and the countdown is currently at 7, update does not change anything because 7 is smaller than 15. If the countdown starts at 15, it's possible for the countdown to reach a value of 7. So the countdown in that case doesn't update, it stays at 7 and it continues 6, 5, 4 and so on. Okay, I hope that's clear. Update is only when the new value is smaller than the current countdown value. And restart, it restarts the countdown from the new value no matter what the values are. And ignore, it doesn't restart the timer, it doesn't update the current countdown value, it doesn't touch it. However, the next, if your timer is set to loop, the next loop will use the new time, always. It doesn't matter what you select here. Once the countdown reaches 0, if a new loop starts, then it starts at the new time. So this update timer, it's only for the current countdown if the countdown has already started when the command runs. Alright. So now let's just do a few examples. Perhaps it will help you better understand. So I'm gonna set the time to 1. When this command runs, it changes the countdown time to 1. And here I will set it to update. And remember, the timer starts at 10 initially. So let's just test it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to press start timer, and normally it would count down 10 seconds. But immediately after I click start timer, I will click time 1. And this will immediately change the time to 1. And remember, I selected update. So the countdown time will also change to 1, and it's going to basically, the timer is basically going to count down 1 second. So let's see. Start time, and there you go. Immediately Alice says you bought a shield because we changed the time to 1 second and it updated after the timer started. Now let's change this to ignore. So you will see, this is going to be interesting. This time, because it's ignore, it's going to count down the full 10 seconds. But afterwards, we're adding some loops here, so afterwards, the next countdowns will be 1 second instead of 10. Okay. So now I'm going to click start timer, time 1, and this time it's counting down the full 10 seconds. It's gonna be a few moments. Let's just be patient. And there we go. Alice said you bought a shield after 10 seconds because update timer was set to ignore. So even though we updated the time, it didn't update it for the countdown that was already started. That countdown did the full 10 seconds. But now it's going to count down again because we added more loops. And this time it will start counting down from 1 second because we changed the time to 1 second. So you will see Alice pretty much instantly says this again. Okay, I'm gonna click the dialog advance button, and there you go. See, 1 second. I'll do it again. Okay, so this is how ignore works. It doesn't change the time for the current countdown that was already started, but if there are more countdowns afterwards, they use the new time. And finally, you have the timer display data field. Now, I mentioned earlier in the choice list when I was explaining timers, remember, you have also a timer display data field inside timers. And as I explained, this is for custom data relating to displaying the timer on screen. And I explained by default, the UI provided with Candy Dialog Engine cannot display timers, but you can add your own code UI customization to display timers. And if you need the timer to include custom data for the purpose of displaying it, you can write it here in the timer. And well, here in the timer status command, you can modify this timer display custom data. Again, there's no code by default to do anything with this data. You need to write your own code. But yeah, if you do write some code that uses this data, this command, timer status, can modify this data as well. And now, one more thing you need to know about the choice list command. You have this here, setup. And setup exists for menu settings. It exists for category settings. It exists for choice settings. And it also exists for timers. There we go. So all four elements have some setup data. So what's the setup exactly? Well, if you look here, there's three fields: setup conversation, setup block, and setup line. And setup is a bridge transition. It's always a bridge. It cannot be a jump or anything else. And it's a bridge that runs at the beginning when a choice list command is run inside the dialog. So when the dialog engine encounters a choice list command, first it runs the setup bridge for the menu, and then it runs the setup bridge for each category. Then it runs the setup bridge for each choice inside categories. And finally, it runs the setup bridge for each timer. And what's the purpose of these bridges? Well, it's to allow you to configure choice lists when they open. For example, imagine you want a choice list to offer different choices depending on the player's level or on the player's health or anything you want. You can use the setup block to modify the choice list when it opens on screen before it's even displayed to the player. It's basically a last-minute reconfiguration of the choice list during the game. And this is where the choice status and timer status commands are very useful. Remember here, I have this more choice, and when I click more, it makes sort plus and shield plus visible. Let me delete it, and instead I'm going to create a menu setup, and it's going to transition to block 8. It's going to bridge to block 8. And here I'm going to use a condition, if. And I'm going to do this. If player level is higher or equal to 5, run a choice status command. And the choice status command we're going to run, it's going to make Sword Plus and Shield Plus visible. So what I'm trying to achieve here is that if the player level is equal or higher to 5, then here the choice list needs to display Sword Plus and Shield Plus. And if the player's level is lower than 5, the Sword Plus and Shield Plus options should not display because the player is basically too weak. Okay, so let's test it. And here we are. We have Sword Plus and Shield Plus because the player level is 7, which is bigger than 5. Now let me set the player level to 2. And let's see what happens if we test again. And now Shield Plus and Sword Plus are not visible because the player is too weak. So yeah, this is what setup can be used for, and the choice status and timer status commands can be very helpful here for these setup bridges. Now, the important thing to remember when it comes to all these setup bridges is the order in which they run. So, I mentioned it before, but just to make sure it's clear, first, the menu's setup is going to run. And then it's going to be the setup for each category, and it's going to run in the same order as the categories. So, here, if I have sale, this is the setup for sale will run first, and then the setup for 2 will run, and so on. And then it's gonna run the setup for all the choices. So it's gonna run the setup for sword, shield, sword plus, shield plus, A, B, in that order. And be aware that for choices, it's gonna run setup even if the choices are disabled. Remember, I explained that choice enabled means that the choice has a button created. This has no effect on setup. Okay, the setup bridge is going to run for all choices even if they're set to disabled. And finally, at last, it's going to run the setup for timers. So the order could matter depending what you're trying to do. So yeah, and you know, whether you use the menu setup or the setup of each choice separately or a mix of both, that's up to you. It depends what you're trying to do. There's no rule there. Now let's talk a bit about customizing the choice UI. If you go to your CandyDE folder and then to the scenes folder, you have those 3 folders here: choice menus, choice categories, and choice buttons. That's because the choice menu that you see inside the game is made of 3 different UI elements. It's made of a choice menu, that's your general choice menu. It's made of a choice category scene, and this is just a scene that's going to display the contents of a category. And it's made of choice buttons, and these are the buttons that match a choice in which you can click. As a reminder, I explained a bit how to customize dialog UIs in the beginning of the video, but as a reminder, you can see here you have 2 scenes by default. You have Candy default and just default, and you've got this for all 3 folders. Now, Candy default, it's just a template, so don't modify it and do not use it directly. Candy default can be modified when Candy Dialog Engine is updated. So what you should do instead, you can duplicate it like this, and then you would modify and use the duplicate. Okay, this one, if you customize it, any changes you make will be lost when you update Candy Dialog Engine. Alright, I'm just gonna delete this one because I don't need it. And default, that's the safe one. You can modify it, you can do whatever you want with it. That's the default choice UI. Now, let me show you the three scenes. First, we have the choice menu, and you can see here it's just a panel container as a root. So this is the menu that you're going to see on screen. And here there's a second panel container for displaying a category. You also have a node for timers. If you create timers in your choice list, they're going to be created as children of this node. And you have the shield. Remember, there's a shield that covers up the menu when a choice is made, so the player cannot click more choices until a choice has finished processing. So this is the shield. You can customize it as well, change the color, change the transparency or alpha, whatever you want. Next, you have the choice categories. And here it's also a very simple setup. It's a panel container again, with a scroll container as a child and a VBox container. And the category scene is going to display choice buttons inside this VBox here. And now let me show you the choice buttons, and they're very simple. By default, it's a panel container with a button inside. Now, you could use just a button. You don't need the panel container if you don't want it. The reason the default scene uses a panel container, it's just in case you want to display more things inside your choice button. For example, maybe you want to display an actual timer that is counting down. So you could use, you could add a rich text label or a progress bar here as a child in addition to the button. So that's up to you. So just to summarize, you have choice buttons. So each choice is going to create an instance of a button. And these buttons will be children of a category scene. So they're going to be children of this node here, the VBox container called list. Okay, all the buttons will be here, and they're going to display here inside the category. And finally, the category is going to be displayed inside the menu. The category will be a child of this. Okay, let me just show you here. It's going to look like this. So you're going to have the menu, and the category scenes will be children of this node, and only one of them will be visible at a time. And then you're going to have buttons inside each category like this. This is what's going to happen at runtime. Okay, so now, again, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, you can do a lot of customization inside Dialog UI scenes, and that includes the choice UI. You can customize a ton of stuff, pretty much everything. The important thing is this: you need these nodes. Let me show you the script. You have these 4 export variables inside the choice menu. That's the script for the choice menu scene. And you can find these exported variables here in the inspector category list. So what you would do here, you would assign this node as category list. And again, this is the parent for the category scenes. And then you have to select a parent for the timers. So we use this node here, timers. That's all timers will be children of this node, if you have any timers. And you also need to provide the shield. So that's the node. You would provide it here. Okay. And finally, you have this exported variable here called never hide. And what is this? Well, let's imagine you have a choice list or a choice menu on screen. And then one of the choices or a timer, doesn't matter. Let's imagine that this choice menu somehow opens a second choice menu. Okay? And the first choice menu does not close. It remains open because you're expecting to return to it later. So now you have two choice menus. By default, Candy Dialog Engine will hide the older choice menu so that only the new one, the second one, is going to be visible on screen. If you select Never Hide here, the first choice menu will remain visible. Now, why would you do that? I don't know. That's up to you. Maybe your game's design requires this. Again, it's a creative decision on your part. But yeah, if you wanna keep a choice menu visible, even if a newer menu is open, you can select this. Now, just to be clear, this doesn't work if you close the first menu. Okay, that only works when the first menu stays open. Now, let's look at the choice category script. And here it's much more simple. There's only one exported variable, button list. And this here is the button list, the VBox container. Okay, you can see it here in the inspector, button list, VBox. So this is the parent for the choice buttons. Very simple. You just need to tell you just need to indicate where the choice buttons have to be instantiated. So this is it. And then you have the choice buttons, and again, let's look at the script. And now here you have three exported variables: choice label, choice tooltip, and choice button. So what is this? Well, choice label, this is where the text for the choice, remember inside Candy Dialog Creator you can specify a label for any choice, like this. If I write this, the button is gonna say buy a sword. Well, this is it. It's telling the code this is where you display the label. It's the button. You could have a rich text label if you want to. Let's say you want your text to have some color, to be bolded, I don't know. You could use a rich text label. That's fine. Choice tooltip. That's the same thing. Remember, you can display a tooltip when the player hovers your choice button with a mouse. Now here, by default, it's the button itself that will display the tooltip, but if you have other nodes in your button scene, you could select any of these nodes for displaying a tooltip. And finally, you have the button itself. Candy Dialog Engine needs to know which node the player clicks or interact with to select a choice. You could have multiple button nodes inside your button scene. I don't know why you would do that, but you might have a reason for that, okay? You might have one button for selecting the choice, and you might have extra buttons for other things. Maybe you have a button that when it's clicked, it's going to display extra information. I don't know. But here, you need to indicate which node selects the choice when it's interacted with. Okay. Now, in the default scene, it's the button node for all three variables. But again, as I explained, you could have more nodes, and you could use different nodes here. Now, there's something interesting you can do with scenes. Obviously, you can create multiple choice UI scenes inside your project. You can create multiple menu, category, or button scenes if you want to. But the really interesting thing is that you can mix scenes inside a choice menu. That means your buttons can have different button scenes, and your categories can also use different category scenes. You don't need the same scene, the same look for all categories or buttons. Let me show you how to do this. So here I have a choice menu. It's more or less the same as the previous one. I just made some modifications. So first I have a sale category, and that's the main category, so it's the first category that will show up on screen, and it has two options, weapons and defense. If I select weapons, it's going to show the weapons category, and in the weapons category I can select a sword or sword plus. If I click defense, it's going to show the defense category, and I can buy a shield or a shield plus. Let me quickly show you in the game so you can see it and you can have an idea of what it looks like. So here you can see we have our default UI, the same as before. And if I click weapons, I get the weapons category. If I click defense, I get the defense category. This is the typical look of the choice menu. It's the default menu. But now, what if you want to use specific scenes for your choice menu on screen? Well, let me show you. Here in the menu settings, you have this button called Scenes, and it's grayed out by default. If you click on it, these data fields will appear. Menu scene, default category scene, and default choice button scene. Now, let's say I want a different menu scene. Now, first of all, the important thing to understand is that if those data fields are empty, Candy Dialog Engine will use the scene named default.tscn automatically. So if you just want to use the default scene, you don't have to provide a scene here. It's automatically using this one, default.tscn. And that's valid for all three of these data fields. But now let's imagine that I want my categories to use a different scene than the default. I could provide one here. I made one, and it's called pink. So let me just use the pink scene for categories, and let me show you what happens now. You can see here the menu looks different. It's pink. And this is the category scene. It's using pink.tscn for all categories. If I navigate to the weapons categories, it's still using the pink scene. Okay, now let's keep the default scene. Alright, again, you don't have to write it, you can leave it empty. I'm just gonna select it so it's more clear. And let's say I want the weapons category to be pink, but I don't want the other categories to be pink. So here in category settings, you also have a scenes button, and if you enable it, it's going to display those two data fields, category scene and choice button scenes. So here, let me select pink for the category scene. And I'm only selecting pink for the weapons category, okay? Sale is empty. And defense, well, I'm gonna assign default, and I will explain everything in a second. Let's just test it for now. So here we have the main scene, sales, and it's using the default scene because we didn't provide a scene for that category. Now if I navigate to weapons, it switches to pink because in the case of weapons we specifically said we want the pink scene. And if I go to the defense category, it's still using the default scene. So sale is using the default, weapons is pink, and defense is using the default scene as well. Let's understand why. For weapons, it's obvious. As I explained, I specifically assigned the pink scene. So it's going to override the menu settings. For defense, the same thing happens. I assigned the default scene, so it's overriding the menu settings. However, since the menu settings also use the default scenes for categories, it doesn't make a difference. Now, sale. It doesn't have a specific category scene, so it's using the menu settings instead. And the menu settings are set to default.tscn. Okay, so basically here in the category settings, if you don't provide a category scene or a choice button scene, it's going to use the menu settings instead. But if you want to override the menu settings, all you need to do is provide some scenes here in the category settings. Alright, now let's continue. So what about the choice buttons? Because as we saw earlier, the choice buttons also are scenes. They have their own scenes. Well, you've got three options. First, you can select a scene here in the menu settings. You can select a default choice button scene. And for example, I'm going to use the blue scene. And I will show you what the blue scene looks like. There we go. The buttons have blue text if I select the blue scene. That's the only difference, the only change in the blue scene for buttons. If I go to the weapon scene, you can't really see it because the background is pink, it's dark, but the buttons are blue. And if I go to the defense scene, the buttons are blue again, right? That's because I assigned the blue scene for buttons to the menu settings. So it's going to apply to all the buttons. However, let me change it back to default. And again, you don't have to write default here. You can leave it blank. It's going to use default automatically. Let's say that for the weapons scene, let me remove the pink. Okay. Let's say that for the button scene, I want to use the blue scene. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. The menu settings have the buttons set to use the default scene, which makes the buttons appear with white text. However, the weapons category uses the blue scene for buttons. And the defense category is also going to use the blue scene for buttons. However, the sale category does not have a scene for buttons. So here's what's going to happen. Since the sale category doesn't have a scene for buttons, it's going to use the menu settings, and that's the default scene for buttons. Weapons and defense, they use the blue scene for their buttons. So let's check it out. Here we go. The sale scene has the default buttons with white text. And now if I click defense, I get the blue buttons with blue text. And weapons, I get the blue buttons with blue text. Okay. But there's more. There's more. Let's say I want Shield Plus. I want the Shield Plus button to have its own color. Well, here in choice settings, you also have a scene button, and you can enable it, and you're gonna get this data field here, button scene. So I'm going to assign green to Shield Plus, and I'm also going to assign green to Sword Plus. And now let's test it. Once again, the buttons here are white because the sale category is using the default scene for buttons. It doesn't have a specific scene for the buttons. And let's go to defense. And now we can see shield is blue and back is blue because the defense category is using the blue scene for buttons. However, Shield Plus is green because we specifically indicated that we want Shield Plus to be green. So here, Shield Plus is overriding the category settings for buttons. Okay, and it's the same with Sword Plus. Remember, we also assigned green to Sword Plus. So if I go to the weapon scene, Sword Plus is also green. It's overriding the category settings, which are blue. Okay, so this should cover pretty much everything you need to know at this point about the choiceless command. It covers the basic and intermediate features and uses. Of course, if you're willing to modify the UI scripts, you could go a lot further. Now, modifying code is considered advanced. It's not necessarily difficult. It's just not a basic use of Candy Dialog Engine, so I'm not going to explain how to modify the UI code here in this video. You can find information in the documentation, and the code itself is not too hard to understand if you look at it. But just so you have, just to make you aware of what's possible. By modifying the code, you could, for example, display a countdown or a progress bar for timers, or you could replace choice buttons entirely. Instead of having buttons that the player clicks in order to select a choice, you could do something else. Maybe a button or some other kind of node that the player simply hovers with the mouse. Or, you could simply let the player press keys on the keyboard where different keys match different choices. There's a lot of possibilities. And you can even add features to the choice UI. You can add a lot of things. Again, Candy Dialog Engine really has a lot of potential to be expanded if you ever have specific needs. So yeah, but everything I've explained in this video otherwise should be good enough for the majority of users. Okay, let's now look at input commands. And we're going to start with the mouse command. I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about choice lists. The mouse command simply changes the mouse mode. Now, mouse mode is a Godot thing. It determines how the mouse behaves. And in Godot, you have 5 options by default: visible, captured, hidden, confined, and confined hidden. So, if I select captured here in my mouse command, whenever this mouse command runs in the dialog, mouse mode will be set to captured. Now, if you want to know what these 5 mouse modes do, you need to read the Godot documentation, because that's a Godot thing, it's not a Candy Dialog Engine thing. However, mouse mode also has 3 additional options: dialog start, dialog end, and choice. And what are these? Well, it's very simple. I talked about this earlier. If you go back to the Candy UI, as an example, here in the inspector, you have those exported variables where you can configure various settings for the dialog engine. And in the mouse mode category, you have 3 variables: mouse mode start, mouse mode end, and mouse mode choice. Mouse mode start, well, when the dialog starts, mouse mode is automatically set to this value, whatever you choose. Mouse mode end, well, when dialog ends, the mouse mode is automatically set to that value, whatever it is that you've chosen. And mouse mode choice, well, if a choice list command runs and the choice list command doesn't have a mouse mode specified, it's going to use that value. So this is what these three values here are in the mouse command. If I select dialog start, when the mouse command runs, the mouse mode is going to be set to whatever mouse mode start is, in this case hidden. Okay, and the same thing with dialog end and choice. So, you know, mouse mode, it's extremely simple, extremely straightforward. It's perhaps the most basic command in the entire dialog engine. And one thing to know is, of course, like most command data, you can provide a variable reference if you want. So when the mouse command runs, if you want mouse mode to be chosen by a variable, you could do this. Like that. And if this variable exists, and if its value matches a mouse mode, that should work. So just make sure that the value for this variable is a string, and the value needs to be written exactly like one of these. So in your script, it should be written like this, for example. Okay. Well, in your script, you would write it like this. Okay, just make sure the value is a string written exactly like one of these. And that's all there is about the mouse command. Now, let's talk about the input command. The input command displays a scene called an input UI or an input scene. And an input scene, it's a scene that the player can typically interact with. Although that's not even a requirement, an input scene could simply run an automated script. But to keep it simple, let's just focus on scenes where the player can interact with elements in those scenes, like buttons or anything really. Now, an input scene can be anything. It could be a prompt window where the player has to type their name or a password. It could be a machine UI with buttons and things you can click and interact with. It could be a puzzle, or it could even be a mini game like a pinball or Pong or whatever you want. And, well, basically when something happens in the mini game, the player scores a point, the player loses, it sends a signal back to the dialog engine, and it makes the dialog do something. That's the premise of an input scene. Now, input scenes are a bit of an advanced feature because there's only one basic input scene provided by default with Candy Dialog Engine, and I'm going to show it to you. This is it. That's the default input scene, and it allows the player to type some text and submit the text. So that's all the default input scene does. If you want a different kind of input scene, like I said, you want a puzzle, an interface, a mini game, anything else, a keypad, you will need to design it yourself, and you will need to write some code for it. You can use the default code for the default input scene as a base or as a template, but yeah, if you're going to make your own input scenes, it's going to require a lot of customization. So just be aware of that. But input scenes are also very, very helpful because sometimes you really want the player to interact with the dialogue somehow. You want the player's actions or events in the game to make the dialogue engine react. Let's look at the actual input command, and we'll see how to configure the default input scene first, and then we can look at the code and discuss how to create your own input scenes. you can see that the input command has a lot of data fields. First, here you have the scene data field, and this is where you select the input scene that you want the command to instantiate. Okay, so yeah, here I would select default because that's the only one I have. Next, I need to provide a mode, and the default input scene has only one mode available unless you add code for custom modes, and that mode is default as well. Now, let's have a look at the code to understand what the default mode does. So here we have the code for the default input scene. And the first thing to understand is when the input command runs in the dialog engine, it will instantiate the scene if the scene is not instantiated already. And then it's going to call this function here, setup, and it's going to pass a bunch of data to the function as arguments. And this data matches those data fields. Now, here inside the setup function, we have this match statement, and this is where mode comes in. And as you can see, there's only one mode here, default. So you can have a look here at what default does, but it's basically configuring a bunch of stuff. It's assigning values to some variables, it's calling some functions, it's doing several things. I'm not going to go in details right now. Now, again, if you want to customize the default input scene, look at the code here, read the documentation, and understand what this code does. And after that, if you'd like to add your own modes, you can do that. Like this. And then you would add some code here for whatever purpose you want. Okay, so this is where mode is relevant. But if you're not customizing the input scene, then for mode here, you just write default. It's the only option when you download Candy Dialog Engine. Next, you have the variable data field. And this is asking, where should the player's input be saved? Okay, remember, the default input scene lets the player type some text and submit it. And we want to save this text somewhere to do something with it, right? So here you can specify the variable that you want to save the text in. So let's say I want to use this input scene to ask the player what their name is. I want the player to type a name. So here's what I would do. I would probably want to modify the player's name in the actor's dictionary. So I would do it like this. There we go. So here I have a variable reference to the actor's dictionary, and the reference goes to the key named player. That's the actor who represents the player. And then display name. Okay, I'm asking the player what their name is, so I want to change the player's display name by whatever name the player provides. Next, I can provide some placeholder text. And what's placeholder text? Well, here in the input UI, this here is a line edit node. You can type text in it. And as you can see here in the inspector, there's this variable called placeholder text, and it's the grayed out text that displays when the field is empty. So you can write something in it, you don't have to. that's up to you. For example, I could write this, and in game, if the field is empty, it's going to show name in gray to essentially tell the player this is where you type your name. I can also provide instructions, and let's look at the scene again. The instructions are here. It's a rich text label. So, here I might want to tell the player, please write your name, or something like that. Like this, what's your name? Or type your name, whatever. So whatever you write here in the instructions data field, in the game it's going to be displayed here. Okay, and then you have the actual text. So this is in case you want some default text inside the input UI when the input UI opens. For example, in some game, the main character has a default name, and the player has the option to change it to whatever they want. So, I could write this, Evan, and then when the input UI opens, it's going to look like this. Evan will be pre-written inside, and the player can erase it and replace it with something else if they want to. So this might be something you want to do in case you'd like to suggest a default name to the player. But again, this is optional. Okay, placeholder text, instructions, text, they're all optional. Okay, and well, that's it. That's all you need to do. Make sure you provide default as the mode, and make sure you provide a variable where whatever the player types is going to be stored. And then you can provide some placeholder text if you'd like to. That's the grayed out text. You can provide instructions. You probably should, otherwise the player might be confused what they're supposed to do. And you can even provide some pre-written text if you want to. Right. And finally, you have those fields here, custom data 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. By default, they don't have any purpose. They're just provided here in case you need them for your own custom input UI. So for the default UI, they don't do anything. Now, since I've set up my input command to ask the player's name, we're going to do a little test. So first we're going to ask the player to type a name. I'm going to delete Evan, and then Alice is going to greet the player to confirm that it's working. Like this. There we go. So here we go. We have our input scene. It's asking us to type our name, and you can see name here is written as the placeholder text, and I can write whatever I want. For example, Evan. And then I should click confirm, and now Alice says, "It's nice to meet you, Evan." So when I clicked confirm, in the actor's dictionary, it set the player's display name to Evan. Now, this worked fine and all, but there was just one small problem, and let me show you. See, the cancel button here appears, it's visible, and the problem is, the way my dialog is set up, if the player clicks cancel, the input UI is going to disappear and no name will be saved. So let's see what happens. It's nice to meet you, and there's no name. Right. So In this case, I don't want the cancel button to be available to the player, because if the player clicks it, no name gets saved, and well, that's a problem. So what I would do here, I would go to the input script, and I would simply, where we have the mode, which I showed you earlier, I would copy the default mode, I would rename it, and here, this line, input cancel button visible, I would set it to false. So if we use the player name mode for the input UI, the cancel button will not show up on screen. And if we use default mode, then the cancel button is visible. Okay, so I'm going to go here in my input command, and I'm going to change the mode. And I'm going to test it. I'm going to save my script. And let's go. There we go. Now we have the confirm button, only the player cannot close the menu without clicking confirm. But now let's keep going. There's still a few things we need to improve with our input scene when we're using it to get the player's name. For example, I can write numbers inside the name, and I can also write special characters. And let's say I don't want to let players write numbers or special characters in their names. I only want letters because I'm old school and I'm boring. So, well, we can take care of that. Inside the default script, this is handled here in the config function. Now, again, let's remember how everything works. When the input command runs, it instantiates the input scene, and then it calls the setup function. And the setup function can have different modes. And these modes call the config function. And the config function has a match statement right here. And once again, there's only one config mode by default. It's called default. That's a lot of defaults, I'm sorry, I know it's getting confusing. Now this is where you decide what kind of name is allowed. You can specify the minimum number of characters, the maximum number of characters, minimum or maximum number of words. There's even options to use a blacklist to forbid specific words or symbols, or a whitelist. And if you use the whitelist, everything is forbidden unless it is specifically featured inside the whitelist. And we're going to talk about the blacklist and the whitelist later. You can also use a regex, if you know what that is. You can allow uppercase and lowercase, numbers, decimals, punctuation, special characters, spaces, and you can decide if your UI should show errors to the player to tell them what's wrong with a name if they type a character that's not allowed. Right. So the default mode here, it allows everything. There's no rules, no limits. There's no minimum number of characters or words, no maximum. Everything's allowed. But when we ask the player for their name, we might want to impose a few restrictions. So here, let's go back to our setup function, and in the player name mode, we have this line, config mode. And let's change it to name. And here, in the config function, we can copy the default match case, and we can rename it. We want to make sure it matches this. So we're going to call it name. And then we can provide, for example, a minimum number of characters and a minimum number of words. And, you know, you could provide a maximum number of words. For example, 2. Or maybe 3 if you want to allow a middle name as well. That's up to you. Okay, blacklist, whitelist, we'll talk about it later. Allow uppercase, lowercase, yeah, we're going to allow it. Now, numbers. We don't want numbers inside a name, so we set this to false. Decimals, we can leave it to true because numbers are false, but it's probably good practice to set it to false as well. But again, if you can't type numbers, logically you cannot type decimals either. So, you know, if this is false, it doesn't matter what this is. Punctuation, no, we don't want punctuation inside names. Special characters, yeah, we could allow them. We might want to let people use dashes or underscores. Spaces, yeah, okay, we can have spaces. So there we go. We just created a custom config mode specifically for when we ask the player to type their name. Okay. And that's all there is to it. We don't need to change anything here because we've already specified player name as the mode. Okay, let's test. And yeah, you can see here there's already an error immediately. Minimum 1 characters required. Well, this is normal. We set the rule that the name requires 1 character minimum, and by default, when the input scene opens, there's nothing in the data field here. It's empty. So it's immediately telling us that whatever is in there is not valid. And if I click confirm, nothing happens because I need to fix this. So I'm going to type a name, Evan. The error is gone. If I click confirm now, it's going to accept the name. But let me just do a few more tests. I'm going to add a number, and now we have an error again. Numbers are not allowed. And if I click confirm, it's not accepting the name. What about punctuation? It doesn't want punctuation either. It's not allowed. Special characters. These are allowed. Remember, we did not forbid special characters. Spaces. Evan James. Spaces are allowed, no problem. What about dashes? Mary Jane. Oh, a dash is considered punctuation. Okay. So I'm going to submit Evan, and it's nice to meet you, Evan. Okay. Yeah, so what about if you want to allow dashes specifically, but they're considered punctuation? What should you do? Well, this is where you might want to use a regex. Instead of forbidding punctuation, you allow punctuation, and you use a regex which forbids all punctuation except dashes. If you don't know what a regex is, look it up on the internet. Now, what about the blacklist and the whitelist? I mentioned we would talk about these two things later, so let's do this. First of all, where do you find these blacklists and whitelists? They're in CandyDE, but CandyDE is made of multiple scripts. Well, it's inside the candy localizations.gd script. That's the one. Now, I'm going to talk about this script, candy localizations, in more detail later when discussing languages. It contains what I call localization dictionaries or localization tables. And these are dictionaries that tell Candy Dialog Engine how to display text in the UI for specific languages. So we'll get into this later, but for now, let's look at this here, input blacklists right here, and input whitelists here. Now, here you can add, this is a dictionary, so you can add blacklists or whitelists, multiple of them. And there's already one by default called void. And you can see that this blacklist or whitelist is empty. And that's the entire purpose of the void list. It's to be empty. You can see it here. Blacklist, void. Whitelist, void. So that means don't use a blacklist or whitelist. Okay, but now let's say you want to create an actual blacklist. You want to forbid some words. Well, you could do this. You can create a blacklist called insults. And what you might want to do here is create different lists for different languages. The first language is default. Yeah, that's another default once again. I'm so sorry about that. I know it's getting annoying. But yeah, the language you make your game in is called default. It's not English, French, German, Spanish. It's default. Whatever language it is, it's always default. Right? And I will explain this later when I talk about languages. There's a reason for that. So in my game, default is English because that's the original language of my game, English. Okay, so now I need to assign an array to default. So let's add some insults inside this array, and we're not going to be too rude because I'm posting this on YouTube. So let's write a few things. Yeah, okay. I don't know if Applehead is actually an insult. A kid called me this in kindergarten once. It sounded like an insult. Yeah, and then if you wanted to add some insults in French, you would do this. Okay. Now, how does it work? If the player sets their game language to default, these words are going to be blacklisted if this blacklist here is selected. So, if the player sets their game to Spanish, these words are not blacklisted because they're not Spanish. They're English. And same here, if the player sets their game to French, this gets blacklisted. It means mean, by the way. It's not a rude word. Just in case some parents are watching. Yeah, so if the player sets their game to French, this here would be blacklisted. Again, only if this blacklist is selected, of course. And, you know, if French is selected as the game language, these words here would not be blacklisted because it's not French. Okay, so you get the idea. And you can do the same for the whitelist. So, yeah, there's that. What I would do, I would go back here to the input script and I would replace void with insults for the blacklist. And now I wouldn't be able to type the words inside the insults blacklist as player names. I mean, I could still type them, but I could not use them as names. The game would reject them. So let's just test it. Okay, well, let's try one of the blacklisted words. Oh, there we go, mean. Forbidden word, mean. Hey, come on, I want this as my name. I'm a mean guy. Okay, well. So it works. You can see it works. And yeah, I'm not going to show you the whitelist because it's basically the same principle in reverse. If you have a whitelist other than void, everything is forbidden except the stuff inside the whitelist. Also, one thing I want to mention quickly, you can add an asterisk to any word in the blacklist or in a whitelist to forbid derivations of that word. For example, here, if I add an asterisk to mean, I can't write anything that starts with mean. So let me just show you again. So mean is forbidden, and if I write meanie, it's also forbidden because mean has the asterisk, right? If I didn't have the asterisk, this would be valid. So yeah, that's also an option. And a few more things I wanted to mention inside the input script. In the config function, here you have these two options that I didn't talk about. Show errors. If you set it to false, it's not going to show errors inside this UI here. Remember earlier when we were typing characters or words that were not allowed, it was displaying an error? So if I set show error to false, this is not going to display anymore. So again, that's up to you if you want to disable it. In our case, it was very useful because it was informing the player why the chosen names were not valid. And then here you have enter behavior. Now, what's this? This is actually what the enter key does when it's pressed, right? Because a lot of players will have the reflex of pressing the enter key to submit their text after typing it. So if you set it to submit, pressing enter will be the same as pressing the confirm button. And you have the option to set this to break instead. And if you do this, when the player presses enter, the enter key inserts a line break. But that only works if the node here is a text edit node. And by default, this is a line edit, and line edits do not accept line breaks. So the break option wouldn't work here by default. Also, it's important to know that enter behavior actually doesn't have any effect inside the default script. There's nothing in this script that checks enter behavior. But you could add your own custom code to detect when enter is pressed. For example, you could use the input function, and then here you would write a bunch of code so that when the enter key is pressed, something happens. So yeah, actually this is like a placeholder. The enter behavior variable, you can find it here, but it's actually a placeholder inside this script. There's no actual code to use it. You need to write that code yourself if you want the enter key to have any effect. Now, this should cover the basic use of the input command. I only showed you how to use the input command with the default input scene, although I mentioned in the beginning that you can use the input command with pretty much any kind of scene, including puzzles, minigames, and anything you can think of. I'm not going to show you how to use the input command with custom input scenes. This is much more advanced. It's not very hard when you understand the basic principles of the input command, but it's definitely too advanced for this video. I might do another video later on these more advanced features and concepts. In the meantime, you can read the documentation on the input command and customizing input UIs. It should provide all the information you need. So yeah, but at least I hope that what I showed you here can help you use the default input scene for various purposes. And one more thing, while making this video, we added a new command, player advance. Now this line doesn't have any data fields, and all it does is pause the dialog until the player presses the dialog advance key. And by default, this is the same key that the player presses to advance when a spoken line has finished displaying on screen. Now, to show you how it works, I'm just going to add a spoken line. And Alice is going to introduce herself. But before Alice speaks, I will need to press the dialog advance key. So let's try it here. There we go. Dialog has started, but nothing is showing because right now dialog is stuck at the player advance command. And once I press the advance key, Alice is going to be able to speak. So let's try it. There we go. It's really that simple, and this command is useful if you want to require that the player manually advances after a command runs. Or perhaps, if media are playing, you may want the player to press the dialog advance key to unpause a specific media. As an example, you might have a cutscene video playing, and at some point it pauses and it waits for the player to press a key to continue to make sure the player is following. Now, as I mentioned, by default, it's using the dialog advance input. If you go to your Candy UI scene and you go to the inspector where you have all the settings, right here you have this exported variable, input player advance, and you can see it has dialog advance assigned, and that's the same as we have here, input advance dialog. This one is for spoken lines, and this one is for the player advance command. If you want to use a different input action, you can just add one to your input map here. You can add any action you want, name it whatever you want, and assign it any key you want, and then you can just provide the name of that action right here. Now, you just need to be careful about one thing. If input enabled is off here, or if the input player advance variable doesn't have an action assigned, or if it has an action but the action doesn't have a key assigned, the player advance command will still pause your dialog. And there will be no way for the player to basically exit the command and let dialog continue. The player will have no input they can provide. And that means dialog will be frozen. Now, the reason the command doesn't have a built-in failsafe against these issues is because we assume there might be special cases where a dialog might start with input disabled, and at some point the dialog encounters the player advance command, but the input should only be enabled later at runtime. And it should be fine if your dialog enables the input when the player advance command is already running. The player should be able to press the advance key and unfreeze the dialog. So this is an intentional design, and you just need to be careful about this. Do not add the player advance command in dialogues where input will never be possible. Also, one small recommendation, you should probably display some kind of prompt on screen to tell the player that they need to press the dialog advance key. It could be a text, or it could just be a symbol or something. That's up to you. And The way you could do this, for example, might be to use the call command. So you could call a function that displays a prompt on screen immediately before the player advance command. Of course, you would have to write that function yourself, but it shouldn't be too hard. Or, and we're going to talk about effect commands and media commands later, but that could also be an option. You could use an effect instead of the call command, or maybe display an image somewhere in a corner or at the bottom or the top of the screen, or maybe even a sound. You've got options, and we're going to talk about these commands in a moment, but that's also something you should probably keep in mind.